2022 was a very packed year for me, and I realized early in the year that I wanted to keep track of all the games I beat. And oh boy, looking back on this list is a bit overwhelming, since I want to talk about all of them, but that's going to take forever to talk about each and every one of the games in one video. So I'll be breaking them into series and be brief about each game. I will go over what I like about them and what I don't like, and try to keep it simple. There will be spoilers for these games. This 2022 retrospective will be broken into 3 parts. So let's get started with the first series I played in 2022, Final Fantasy. I began the year with 100%ing Final Fantasy VII Remake. I had already beaten this game before, but I decided to go back and just do everything. This game is amazing. Easily one of the best games of all time, in my opinion. I feel like this game nails almost everything perfectly. From the story, to the characters, to the gameplay, to the OST. I think all of it is just great. I'm just going to focus on the gameplay a little bit since I want to do a video on Final Fantasy VII Remake at a later date. The gameplay in this game feels so good to play when you understand it. The customizability the game allows and its materia system is fun to experiment with, and allows you to come up with a bunch of combinations. For example, the elemental materia can be paired with a spell like fire on your equipment, and depending on what equipment you put it on, determines what effects the materia does. Like putting the materia on a sword will make the sword have a fire effect with your basic attacks, or putting it on your gear will make you resistant or immune to fire. That's just an example of one of many things you can do with the materia system. Now, to mention something I don't like in Final Fantasy VII Remake is the air combat. Oh man, the air combat needs some work. Specifically with Cloud and Tifa. Aerith and Barret are fine, and Yuffie's great in the DLC. All those 3 can do air combat perfectly. Cloud and Tifa need some reworking in terms of air combat. Now, for actually 100%ing the game, that was a journey. It was very time consuming, but fun for the most part. There were a few trophies that I wasn't a fan of because of how long they took to get. Like the dress trophy, which requires you to replay the same chapters multiple times to get different dresses for Tifa and Aerith, which just took a while and wasn't all that interesting. It was just tedious. Something I did enjoy a lot was fighting summons, coming up with different strategies to take down the bosses as quickly as possible, but that just goes back to the materia system. The last thing I want to mention for Final Fantasy VII Remake is playing through the game on hard mode. Hard mode changes the game completely. Since items are disabled, this mode forces you to manage your MP, since if you just spam it, you'll run out and you'll be without MP for a good while, since benches also don't restore MP anymore. This mode also gives the bosses some more attacks in battle, so you'll need to figure out how to deal with these new attacks. I think this mode is a good hard mode because it forces you to play the game differently. So from a gameplay perspective, you will not be playing the exact same game on a replay. I do wish there was a mode in between hard and normal, so the enemies are stronger, but you don't have to worry about not having items, since sometimes I just want to play the game casually with a New Game Plus save, and have some sort of challenge without having to worry about not having items. That's all I'm going to say about this game for now. Moving on to the next game I had beat was Final Fantasy IV DS Remake. I do not like this game. I think this is the worst Final Fantasy game I've played so far. This game is horribly balanced and just straight unfair in multiple instances, at least for the DS Remake. For example, there was a boss fight with Golbez where you get back a party member named Iridia. She's level 35, which suggests you should be level 35 for this fight. This fight is nearly impossible at level 35. Golbez does way too much damage to everyone. You have to grind to get about level 40 to even stand a chance, since he's able to attack everyone in the party at the same time, and he can one-shot you if you are the suggested level for the fight. There are normal enemies in the castles and dungeons in this game that are also way too strong and can one-shot your entire team. A lot of this game requires you to be over-leveled to even stand a chance. I also don't like its story. It started off interesting in the beginning until the midpoint to the end. The thing that annoyed me the most is where the characters would have a big sacrifice moment, but then be brought back later for no reason. It sucks all the emotions out of those moments since they lead to nothing, and the game does this multiple times with multiple characters. So it became old fast. Also, the characters in this game are not that great. To give a general statement on some of the characters, Cecil is just okay. He started out interesting, but then became kind of boring. Kane is actually pretty cool. I like his arc throughout the story and how he betrays you at one moment in the game, but then he joins you later for story reasons. Rydia is great. She disappeared for half of the game and then showed up out of nowhere, but I would have liked to see more of her explored, like where she was for that time period or whatever. Tellah was boring. Like, not much interesting going on with him besides his desire for revenge, which leads to his death. Rosa was also boring. Her whole character was just being the love interest of Cecil. Edward was meh. I don't remember much of him at all besides his girl dying at the beginning. Yang is just there. I literally cannot tell you a single detail about this character except that he has a sacrifice moment and then he's alive later. Palom and Porom was just there to die. They showed up, and then you go through this little mountain part, and then they die. Cid was also meh. He has a sacrifice scene also, but then comes back from it for no reason. Edge was disappointing, because I thought he was going to be a different character entirely, but then he just ended up being like a flirty ninja, and then that was about the extent of his character. So in conclusion, I don't care for the cast. I would go into more detail, but I really want to move on to the next game. Final Fantasy XV was a game I heard mixed things on. It's either you loved the game or you hated it. So I was looking forward to playing it myself to form my own opinion on it. And after playing it, I think the game is okay. It's fine. It's not the best in the series, like some people would claim, but is also far from the worst game in the series. But to be fair, I did play the Royal Edition of the game, which adds a lot more to the game that wasn't there at launch, and apparently they fixed a dungeon or something. I'm not completely sure. But what I will say with what I've played is, I wasn't too impressed with the combat. It didn't feel satisfying to me because the hits on enemies had no oomph behind them, which was a problem for me personally since I like having impact with my attacks. Also, the entire magic system was just weird with how you had to fuse elements and items to get different spells, and it left magic unused by me for the majority of the game, and that just sucks because I like experimenting with magic in these games, but 15, I just did not have that desire to do so. One of Final Fantasy XV's strongest points is its set pieces. Its set pieces are so epic and intense that it's something that I think everyone who is a fan of the series should experience. You get to see these giant summons from the series at like their biggest form yet, as far as I can recall. Like, these things are massive, and the fights with them are pretty great, and I think it's just one of the strongest points in the game besides its music. And the music, actually speaking of music, the music that accompanies these summon bosses, magnificent, just magnificent. The overall story for the game was fine. The final chapter was pretty rough, but in a good way, since I actually do like this cast. I like all four characters, and seeing them bond throughout the game was great. And how they became like brothers to each other, and you see them squabble, and then you see them get back together. You know, typical JRPG stuff. But other than that stuff, the game had a lot of dead air. Like, no music playing when running around in the open world or driving in the car, unless you turned on the radio or you had an MP3 player, which both let you pick music from the series to play, which is pretty cool, but I prefer when a game has its own OST for the overworld and such. Because the battle OST is really good. Like, when they actually do have songs in this game, it's fantastic. But the overworld, there wasn't really any music. But that's all I really have to say about this game. It's overall a solid game. I somewhat enjoyed my time with it, and I didn't hate it. The next Final Fantasy game I played was Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X was a solid game. I didn't really enjoy a lot of its characters, except for Auron, who was great, and easily my favorite out of the entire cast. Simply because of his mysterious nature and how he interacted with the cast. But besides that, I didn't really care for anyone else. Tidus isn't my type of character. Yuna was kind of forgettable for me. Lulu was underwhelming. Wakka's just kind of a meme. I forget the beast guy's name. There's a beast guy that joined you. He's like animal-like. He looks like a lion. He has like one important fight in the story, and that's about it. And I can't really say much about him. Riku was pretty cool, although I can't really say she's memorable. That's my issue with Final Fantasy X, actually. I can't remember much of the game's, like, characters. I remember some of its story, but its characters don't really stick out to me, so they're really hard to remember. I remember not liking Seymour, though. Seymour was weird, kind of creepy, but, like, he had good music. So that's all I gotta say for him. His final boss theme, probably the best song in the game, easily. The Sphere Grid is a very cool mechanic and an interesting way to level up your party members and get them new abilities. Since they can learn each other's skills and magic, you can have characters fill multiple roles, which is fun to mess around with. So you could have someone who's just pure magic, like they know all the magic spells in the game. So they're great at healing, they're great at putting out damage, they're great at buffing, they're great at debuffing. Like, having a character who's good at all four of those things is very fun. Also, someone who's a damage, like a tank. So they do heavy damage and they're a tank. Like, I had made Auron my damage tank. So he puts out on a lot of physical damage, but he can also take a lot of the physical damage. And I really enjoy the experimentation in this game. And I'd like to see it tackled in another game in the future, maybe. But with an action RPG spin on it. I feel like that could be interesting. My overall thoughts on Final Fantasy X, it's just okay. I don't hate the game. I don't love it. It was a fun time. It had some really cool ideas. But I don't think I'll be revisiting it anytime soon. But I have a feeling this is a trend with me personally with the Final Fantasy series, because I've played a lot of the games before this year, and I found them just to be okay. But I'm hoping that changes when the collection for Final Fantasy 1 through 6 comes out later this year, because I want to play 1 through 6 and get my thoughts of them. I'm looking forward to Final Fantasy 6 the most, because I hear a lot of good things about that game, and I hope it's not just okay for me. I really want to love that game. Anyway, I got a little bit off topic there. Final Fantasy X is a good game. If you like JRPGs, I feel like you should check it out. Moving on, I was very curious of how Final Fantasy Strangers of Paradise would be. So I had bought the game on release. The main thing I have to say about this game is, it's very repetitive. There isn't much to the combat besides your weapons and abilities changing with each class. But other than that, there wasn't much of a difference between them. You build up the enemy's meter, and then you finish them off. Enemies in this game also become damage sponges, and it's very, very annoying to deal with in the late game. The class system was fun to play with, since most classes have different weapons, so they would play differently. You can have two classes equipped at the same time, so you can swap on the fly, which can lead to some clutch moments where you switch from a knight to a mage or cleric to do some massive damage, or get the party back up to full health. But other than moments like that, the gameplay remains the same for the majority of the game. The main thing that carried the game was the ability to have co-op multiplayer. This game was really fun to play through with a friend. Going through this schlock of a story that doesn't take itself seriously until the very end of the game for some reason. I also didn't like the last section for the gameplay, since they force you to play that entire part alone, which makes sense story-wise, but gameplay-wise, it wasn't fun at all. Majority of your fight with the final boss was just rolling around, dodging attacks, getting hits in where you can, but it just feels like you aren't doing enough damage to him, and magic's a very limited resource in this fight. Although one positive thing I have to say about this game besides the multiplayer is the final cutscene in the game. Seeing the party from the first Final Fantasy walk in to fight Jack, the final boss of the first game, was really cool. I think that was one of the coolest things to see in the franchise so far. But other than that, I feel like this was a very wasted concept. Being able to play through a prequel of Final Fantasy 1 where you get to see like how the final boss of that game became how he was or whatever. That's such a cool concept that they just don't really take seriously in this game, and it just feels wasted. It's really, really unfortunate. Really don't recommend getting this game unless it's on sale or if you are extremely bored and need a game to mess around with 2 other friends. Moving on to the last Final Fantasy game I played in 2022. It was Crisis Core Reunion. I already covered this game. Go watch my video on that game if you want to know my thoughts about it. That about wraps up my thoughts on all the Final Fantasy games I played last year. Again, like I said in the beginning, this is a first part of a 3-part series. I want to be faster with the next 2 parts so I can move on to other games. There's already a couple games I want to cover for 2023, but I need to finish these videos first. With that being said, make sure to like and subscribe for more, and if you want to have a discussion about anything I've talked about, leave a comment. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.